I've seen money walk into my courtroom in silk, diamonds, and fake manners, but I had never seen it wear such open contempt. I knew the second that Millionaire's daughter looked me up and down that she believed my courtroom was just another room her family could buy. I want to ask you something before I go any further. Have you ever seen someone walk into court like rules were only for other people? I remember that morning clearly because I had opened her file before I ever saw her face, and even on paper I could smell trouble. I had a simple property damage case in front of me, at least that was how it looked at first. I had one woman asking for help fixing the only car she owned, and I had one young woman with a famous last name acting like the whole thing was beneath her. I had no idea when I turned that first page that I was about to watch entitlement fall apart one sentence at a time. I don't need raised voices to know when a courtroom day is going to turn ugly. I can usually tell from the way people stand, from the way they touch their paperwork, from the way they look at the bailiff, and from the way they treat the clerk before I even take my seat. I've spent years watching people swear they want justice when what they really want is immunity. I've learned that honest people usually come in worried about facts, while dishonest people come in worried about control. I start every court day the same way because discipline keeps the noise out. I read my files early, I mark the gaps, and I remind myself that truth often shows up in small details before it shows up in big dramatic moments. I don't care who came from money, who came from nothing, or who arrived in a chauffeur-driven car. I care about who is lying, who is dodging, who is hurting, and who still has enough character left to tell me the truth when the truth makes them look bad. I've always respected people who admit a mistake before I have to drag it out of them. I can work with bad judgment, panic, and even foolishness if I get honesty with it. I have far less patience for polished excuses, fake confusion, and that special kind of arrogance that shows up wearing a smile. In my courtroom, attitude matters. Because attitude tells me whether I'm looking at a human being who made a bad choice or a human being who believes consequences are for everybody else. I remember glancing down my morning list and stopping at the name Elena Cruz. I saw a note beside it that said she was asking for repairs, lost wages, and a rental fee after a parking garage collision. I also saw the defendant's name, Ava Langford, and I recognized the last name because her father's real estate signs were on half the new towers in the city. I didn't make much of that at first because I've seen wealthy people behave with grace, and I've seen poor people behave with cruelty. I judge choices, not tax brackets. I want to ask you this while we're here with it. When someone shows more respect to a handbag than to another human being, what does that tell you? I took the bench, called the case, and watched Elena Cruz stand first. I noticed her before she said a single word. I saw neat hands holding a worn folder so carefully it looked like she had spent half the night arranging every paper inside. I saw a faded blouse pressed flat, a pair of shoes cleaned as well as age would allow, and eyes that carried the kind of tired I only see in people who work before sunrise and still go home to care for somebody else. I asked Elena to step forward, and I heard a soft voice that made me lean in instead of push back. I learned in the first minute that she was 57, widowed, and raising her 12-year-old grandson because her daughter had died 3 years earlier. I heard that she worked as a cafeteria manager at a public middle school, and I heard that she cleaned banquet rooms 2 nights a week because inhalers, rent, and school shoes do not care how hard a grandmother is already trying. I listened while Elena explained that the car in dispute was not just transportation to her. I heard her say it was the car she used to get to the school before dawn, to take her grandson Mateo to his lung doctor, and to carry groceries, uniforms, and every other piece of a life held together by routine. I saw the way she swallowed. Before she mentioned that missing even a few shifts would hurt her badly, I believed that part before I ever reached the repair estimate because real strain has a quiet sound to it. I asked Elena to tell me what happened in the garage, and I noticed that she did not rush. I heard her choose each word like it mattered, which usually means it does. I learned that she had finished cleaning after a charity birthday event at the Langford Hotel, that she had walked into the employee garage close to midnight, and that She had found Ava Langford's luxury coupe pressed into the side of her old blue sedan. I also heard that she had not even started yelling. I heard that she had simply asked for insurance information. I watched Elena's face change when she told me what came next. I heard that Ava looked at the dent in Elena's car, looked at the dent in her own car, and laughed. I heard that Ava said that thing was ready for the junkyard before I touched it, and I heard that she waved her phone in Elena's face like the whole scene was entertainment. I heard Elena admit that she cried later in private, but I also heard that she stood there in the garage and asked again for insurance because grown women with jobs do not have time to fall apart on schedule. I noticed that Elena did not ask me for pity. I heard no grand speeches and no perfect little phrases made for sympathy. I heard a woman trying to stay dignified while explaining why the loss of a cheap car could shake an entire household. I have more respect for that kind of restraint than I do for all the theater in the world. I'd rather hear a cracked truth than a polished act any day. I want you to think about this with me. If I saw fear in one woman and vanity in the other before the full story even began, where do you think my instincts started to go? I called Ava Langford forward, and I felt the air in the room change before she reached the table. I saw expensive confidence walking in high heels, and I saw a young woman who had practiced being admired so long that she had forgotten how to be corrected. I noticed that she carried no folder at all, only a phone in one hand and a little white handbag tucked under the other arm. I saw sunglasses resting on her head indoors, and I saw a smirk that told me she thought the hard part of life was parking. I also noticed something else the second I looked at her. I saw that she wasn't nervous in the ordinary way. I didn't see the tension that comes from wondering whether facts will hold up. I saw irritation. I saw a woman bothered that she had to stand in front of someone she could not ignore. That difference matters. Nervous people look at me because they want to be heard. Entitled people look at me because they want to measure whether I can be managed. I asked Ava if she was ready, and I heard her say, "As ready as I can be for this." I heard the little laugh at the end of it, and I saw her glance toward the gallery like she expected support from the room. I looked past her once and noticed a man in a dark tailored suit sitting still with his jaw locked tight. I knew from the photo that I was looking at her father. I didn't need him to speak to know he had cleaned up more than one mess in that family. I told Ava to focus on me, not the gallery, and I asked for her side. I heard her say that Elena had parked that scrap heap too close and that the real damage to the luxury car happened when Elena started yanking on the driver's side and making a scene. I heard her say it with the calm tone people use when they think labeling another person dramatic will save them from facts. I also heard her call Elena that woman 3 times in less than a minute, and I pay attention to language like that because contempt always leaks early. I looked at the file, then back at Ava, and I saw more than a property dispute sitting in front of me. I saw a power imbalance. I saw a working grandmother holding repair bills and a rich young woman holding attitude. I saw a father in the back who looked like a man waiting for money to handle what character should have handled long. Before court, I also saw that Eva had filed a counterclaim accusing Elena of harassment, emotional distress, and damage by aggressive contact. That told me this was no accident of paperwork. That was strategy. I asked Ava a simple question. I asked, "Did you hit her car?" I heard her answer, "I barely touched it." I asked, "Did you give her your insurance?" I heard her say, "I didn't think it was necessary because she was already acting irrational. I don't raise my voice unless I have to, but I felt my patience narrow right there. I can forgive a mistake faster than I can forgive someone deciding that another person's dignity depends on their mood." I asked Ava whether she had called security or the police. I heard her say no. I asked whether she took pictures. I heard her say yes. I asked whether she shared those pictures with the court. I heard her say her assistant had them somewhere. That answer bothered me more than it might bother some people because innocent people do not usually lose the very images they say would clear them. I've seen confidence before. What I was looking at now was entitlement trying to dress itself up as calm. I watched Elena while Ava spoke, and I saw that Elena never once rolled her eyes, laughed, or interrupted. I watched Ava while Elena spoke, and I saw her smile at the wrong moments. I don't miss things like that. When one person describes a hard life and the other person smiles through it, I learn something even before the evidence starts talking. Cruelty is often more honest than testimony. I asked Ava why she had filed a counterclaim if the collision was so minor. I heard her say, because people like this see a nice car and think jackpot. I let the silence sit there after that because sometimes silence tells the whole room exactly how ugly a sentence was. I looked straight at her and said, I don't measure people by the age of their car, and you don't get to insult working people in my courtroom to hide a weak case. I saw the smirk flicker, but I also saw that she still thought I was warming up. I need your judgment on this part. If someone kept smiling while another person described pain, how long would you stay patient? I turned back to Elena and asked whether she had any witness. I heard her say that one of the hotel valets came over after the crash, and I heard that he had written down his phone number because he thought Ava would deny what happened. I asked whether that witness was present, and I watched a young man in a plain black work shirt stand up from the second row. I saw another kind of tired on his face, the kind service workers wear when they have spent too many nights swallowing disrespect for tips. I brought him forward, and I learned his name was Marcus Bell. I heard him tell me he had been finishing his shift in the garage when he heard the impact. I heard him say that Eva had been holding her phone up in selfie mode while backing out too fast. I heard him say that he walked over because Elena looked shaken and because Eva had started talking about the car like Elena was not standing there. I watched Marcus keep his eyes on me and not on Eva. That usually means a witness wants no part of drama, only distance from it. I asked Marcus whether Elena touched Ava's car aggressively. I heard him say no. I asked whether Ava gave insurance information. I heard him say no. I asked whether anyone threatened anyone. I heard him say only Ava used insulting words, and then he hesitated. I noticed that hesitation immediately because truth often slows down when memory crosses into shame. I asked him to continue, and I heard him say Ava laughed and called Elena garage staff even after Elena said the damaged car belonged to her. I looked at Eva, and I heard her cut in with, this valet is obviously making it up because she tips badly. I didn't even let that sentence finish before I raised my hand. I said, you will not attack every witness who disagrees with you. I leaned forward and added, status is not a shield in here, and class prejudice will not do. You're talking for you. I watched her blink hard, and for the first time I saw the beginning of offense in her face. Some people confuse correction with disrespect because nobody has ever corrected them. I went back to the file and asked about the damage itself. I heard Elena explain that the impact crushed the rear door enough that it would not open, and I heard that the repair cost was more than she could afford out of pocket. I also heard that she had missed 4 days of work because the school bus route and late cleaning job did not line up with borrowed rides. I saw the estimates, the pay stubs, and the rental quote. I did not see exaggeration. I saw ordinary financial harm, and that kind of harm can hit harder than people with money ever seem to understand. I asked Ava for her pictures again. I watched her scroll through her phone with a little annoyed sigh, and I heard her say she must have deleted them because they were not important. I asked, not important, but important enough for you to file a counterclaim? I watched her lift one shoulder and say, I have people who deal with things like this. That was when I knew exactly who I was dealing with. I was looking at a woman who had been kept so far from consequences that she thought forgetting was the same thing as innocence. I asked Ava whether she had posted anything from that night online. I saw her eyes move for a split second. I've learned to trust those tiny movements more than speeches. I heard her say, maybe a birthday story. I asked whether the birthday story showed the garage. I heard her say she didn't remember. I was angry, but I didn't show it yet. I kept my face still because stillness makes careless people keep talking. I said, let me make this easy. Did you record yourself after hitting Miss Cruz's car? I heard Ava answer, I record a lot of things. That doesn't prove anything. I looked her straight in the eye and said, truth does not need a designer label, and it certainly does not need your permission to show up. I noticed her father shift in his seat for the first time. I also noticed Elena clasp her folder tighter like she finally felt the ground holding under her feet. I want you to stay with me here and answer this in your own mind. When a person starts talking faster every time truth gets closer, do you hear confidence, or do you hear panic trying to wear confidence's clothes? I asked Elena whether she had any saved messages or recordings. I heard her say her nephew had helped her gather everything because she did not know how to save social media videos by herself. I watched her slide a printed packet and a flash drive toward the clerk. I remember feeling that quiet little shift I get when a case stops being foggy. Honest people do not always come in polished, but they often come in prepared because hard life teaches them that nobody will fight for them if they do not fight for themselves. I admitted the exhibits and started with the printed screenshots. I saw a still image from Ava's own birthday story. I saw Ava in the driver's seat. I saw the corner of Elena's lucid and in frame, and I saw a line of caption text at the bottom that said, "Some idiot boxed me in with a fossil." I read that line once, then again, because sometimes contempt speaks so clearly it sounds made up. I looked at Eva and asked if that was her account. I heard her say very quietly this time, "It could be." I moved to the next image, and I felt the room pull inward. I saw another screenshot taken seconds later. I saw Ava's face turned toward the camera. I saw the dented vehicles behind her, and I read her own caption out loud. "If this cleaning lady tries to scam me, I'm calling Dad." I did not have to dramatize a single word. I only had to read what she herself had written while the paint was still fresh on the damage. I watched Elena stare down at the table because some humiliations burn twice when they are repeated in public. I asked Ava whether Elena had told her she was a cleaner. I heard Ava say no. I asked whether Elena had told her the car belonged to her. I heard Ava say yes. I asked, "So when you wrote cleaning lady, you were not confused? You were insulting her." I saw her lips part, then close. I have always believed that silence gets very honest. When arrogance starts running out of exits, I let that silence sit there long enough for the whole room to feel its weight. Then I asked for the video. I watched the monitor come to life, and I heard the scratchy sound of garage echo and music leaking from somewhere upstairs. I saw Ava's own camera first, shaky and bright, and I heard her laughing before the important part even arrived. I watched her swing the phone around and say, "Look at this mess now. My whole night is ruined." Then I heard a dull impact, a sharp intake of breath from Elena off camera, and Ava's voice saying, "Oh, please, don't start." I paused the clip and looked at Eva. I asked, "Do you still want me to believe this was not your fault?" I saw her sit very still. I played it again, and this time I let the next few seconds run. I heard Elena say very clearly, "Ma'am, that is my car. I need your insurance." I heard Ava answer, "I'm not handing my information to some random staff person in a garage." I didn't need a speech from counsel, and I didn't need theatrics. I had her own mouth doing the work for me. I thought that was enough to break the case open, but I hadn't even reached the part that changed the room completely. I turned to the next exhibit and found text messages from Ava's phone number to a friend named Chloe. I saw the messages time stamped less than 10 minutes after the crash. I read them silently first, then out loud. "Because truth this ugly should not whisper." I read, "I clipped some old woman's junk car," and then I read, "Dad says never admit anything when poor people get emotional." I'm going to ask you something right here because this was the moment the whole day turned in my mind. If someone spoke about another human being like that in front of you, what would you have done? I heard a sound leave the gallery when I read that text, and I knew the balance of power had just shifted for good. I looked at Elena, and I saw tears in her eyes that she had worked hard all morning not to let fall. I looked at Marcus, and I saw the anger of a young man who had probably heard rich people talk around him like workers were invisible more times than he could count. Then I looked at Eva, and I saw something new at last. I saw the first crack. I asked Ava whether those texts were fake. I heard her say her phone had been hacked. I asked whether her social media had also been hacked. I heard her say maybe. I asked whether the witness had been hacked too. I heard nothing. I took off my glasses and set them down slowly because I wanted her to understand that I was done being patient with performance. I said, I can work with a mistake. I can even work with selfishness. I will not work with a lie that keeps changing clothes. I watched Ava turn toward her father for the first time, and I watched him refuse to rescue her with his eyes. I knew that look. I've seen it on parents who spent years smoothing rough behavior with money until the day money stopped working. I almost felt sorry for him for half a second, but not enough to forget who was actually hurt. Here, Elena had to borrow rides, Miss Pay, and sit through public insult because this young woman thought mockery was cheaper than accountability. I asked Ava whether she wanted to keep her counterclaim on the record. I heard her say I was upset. I said upset people tell the truth badly. Dishonest people build paperwork around a lie. I asked again whether she wanted to stand by a sworn claim that Elena harassed her and damaged the luxury car by aggression. I watched Ava wet her lips and say, maybe it was a misunderstanding. That sentence might have fooled somebody who had not spent years listening to excuses bend under pressure. It did nothing for me. I leaned forward and let my voice go colder, not louder. I said, money may buy distance from many things, but it does not buy distance from truth. I said, you were not dragged in here because you are rich. You are in front of me because you hit a working woman's car, insulted her, denied her information, and then tried to bury her. Under a false claim, I watched her eyes widen because some people only understand the seriousness of their conduct when another adult finally says it without fear. I wasn't shocked often, but one more thing got my attention before the break came. I asked Elena whether the crash had caused any physical injury, and I heard her say she had twisted her shoulder pulling the stuck rear door after the collision because her grandson's inhaler bag was inside. I saw the clinic papers showing a strain and a brace. I watched Ava actually roll her eyes at that. That was when I knew there was no remorse anywhere near this case. Fear and remorse are not the same thing, and I knew the difference. I told Ava to look at Elena while I asked the next question. I watched her fail even that simple test. I asked, did you ever once apologize? I heard her say, I'm sorry she took it so personally. I let the silence hit like stone. Then I said, that is not an apology. That is vanity wearing a weak disguise. I said, respect is the cheapest thing in this room. You still refuse to pay it. I saw her face flush, and this time the flush did not come from anger alone. I saw embarrassment beginning to mix with fear. I want you to tell me honestly in your own mind, if an apology only shows up after the like elapses, would you call that remorse? I saw the breakdown start in the hands first. I watched Ava grip that little white handbag so hard the leather folded under her fingers. I heard the change in her breathing before I heard the change in her voice. I saw her chin lose that careless lift it had carried all morning. I've seen tears before, and I've seen panic before. And I can tell the difference between a soul waking up and an image trying to save itself. What I was seeing then was image panic. I asked one final time whether she understood what she had done. I heard her say, I didn't think it would become this. I said, that is the problem. You didn't think beyond yourself at all. I watched her eyes fill, but I also watched where those eyes kept going. I saw them go to the gallery, to the camera, to her father, and only. Finally to Elena. Real remorse looks at the person it hurt first. Strategy looks everywhere else. I heard Ava try one more route. I heard her say she had been under stress, that the party had gone badly, that her friends were filming, that alcohol had made her say careless things, and that social media made everything look worse than it was. I've heard every version of that song before. I said, do not blame a phone for words your mind chose. I said, do not blame a bad night for character you carried into the garage before the crash even happened. I watched Marcus lower his head because he knew somebody had finally said what workers so often have to swallow. I turned to Elena and asked how she managed after the crash. I heard her say she borrowed rides for a week, missed the second cleaning job because nobody could pick her up that late, and spent one night crying in the kitchen because she did not know how she would pay to fix the door. I heard her add, almost apologetically, that her Grandson had asked if rich people were allowed to break your things without saying sorry. I felt something inside me go very still when I heard that, because children learn class from the behavior adults tolerate. I looked back at Ava and said, I want you to hear this clearly. When a child asks whether rich people are allowed to break things and walk away, that question was written by your conduct. I said, the law is not a private service for families with towers and lawyers. I said, you don't get to injure dignity, deny facts, and then act offended when consequences arrive. I watched her cry then, but I did not soften, because softness in the wrong moment teaches the wrong lesson. I saw her father rise halfway from his seat like he wanted to speak, and I stopped him with one look. I said, I am not asking for rescue money in the middle of testimony. I am deciding whether your daughter told the truth under oath. I watched him sit back down, and I almost respected him for not making it worse. Then I turned to Eva and asked whether she understood that filing a false sworn claim was serious. I heard her whisper, yes. That was the first honest answer I had heard from her all morning. I don't enjoy humiliating people, no matter what some viewers imagine. I enjoy clarity. I enjoy the moment a liar realizes that the room is no longer bending around them. I enjoy the protection of ordinary people who would have been crushed if nobody stopped the performance. That day, I knew the most important thing I could do was speak plainly enough that Elena would feel seen and Ava would never forget the cost of contempt. I set the file down slowly and I gave my ruling. I said, I find that you, Ava Langford, caused this collision through careless driving. I said, I find that you refused to exchange insurance information, insulted Miss Cruz, then filed a false counterclaim to pressure her into backing down. I said, I dismiss your counterclaim in full because it is unsupported, dishonest, and offensive to the facts I have in front of me. I let each line land one by one because some lessons need room to echo. Then I turned to Elena and I gave her every dollar her evidence justified. I awarded the full repair cost, the rental fee, the missed wages, and the clinic expense for her shoulder. I also added court costs because she should never have had to spend money chasing a truth that was sitting on Ava's own phone the whole time. I looked at Eva and said, you are not paying for a dent alone. You are paying for arrogance, delay, and a lie that made a hard life harder. I meant every word of that. I wasn't finished. I addressed the false sworn filing directly because I will not treat perjury like a rich girl's mistake in paperwork. I said, I am referring the counterclaim record and supporting exhibits for further review because lying in signed court papers is not a social slip. I watched her face lose its last bit of color. I added, if your apology shows up only after the evidence does, it isn't remorse, it's strategy. I could feel the room go silent in that deep way it does when truth lands harder than sound. I gave one final warning because I wanted her to carry it longer than the check her family would write. I said, I don't bend facts to fit privilege. I said, I don't care what your last name opens outside this room, because in here it opens nothing. I said, character is what you do when the other person cannot fight back, and yours failed you in that garage. I saw her crying openly by then, but I also saw that she was finally listening, and that was more than she had given Elena. I looked at Elena one last time before I closed the case, and I said, Miss Cruz, I believe you. I cannot tell you how much those 4 words can matter to somebody who has spent weeks being made to feel small. I watched her shoulders drop with relief so sudden it looked like pain leaving the body. I also watched Marcus nod once from the second row like a witness who had almost given up on being useful. Moments like that are why I still care about the work. I want to leave you with this before I tell you what happened after. I still believe character shows itself fastest when power thinks nobody can stop it, and I want to know if you believe that too. I remember the aftermath as clearly as the ruling because consequences tell me whether a lesson touched the surface or the bone. I watched Elena step out of that courtroom with her papers held to her chest like they were oxygen. I later learned that she fixed the car door, kept her school job, and stopped missing the cleaning shifts. That covered her grandson's medicine. I also learned that she framed the judgment copy in a plain black frame, not because she loved court, but because she wanted one reminder in her kitchen that truth had not abandoned her. I heard through the clerk a week later that the judgment was paid in full by certified funds. I also heard that Ava came in person to deliver them. I did not see that part myself. I was told she looked smaller without the performance wrapped around her. I don't know whether the change lasted, and I won't pretend every courtroom lesson turns into a better life. I only know that for one long day, money failed to erase what manners, honesty, and empathy had failed to build. I thought about that case more than I expected. I kept coming back to the question Elena's grandson asked, the one about whether rich people were allowed to break your things and walk away. I wish no child ever had reason to ask that. I also know children ask honest questions when adults create ugly examples. That day, I could not fix every unfair thing in the world, but I could answer that boy's question with something solid. I could answer it with no. I've spent enough years on the bench to know that accidents happen, tempers flare, and people sometimes speak before wisdom catches up. I can handle that. What I have no patience for is the belief that money can replace character, that status can excuse contempt, or that a working person should accept humiliation because the person causing it has better shoes and a bigger name. I do this job because truth needs a room where it does not have to dress well to be heard. I also know that justice is not always loud. Sometimes justice is a woman hearing "I believe you" after being called a liar. Sometimes justice is a witness learning that his plain uniform does not make his words smaller. Sometimes justice is a young woman discovering that her family name cannot talk over evidence, and sometimes justice is simple enough for anyone to understand. If you hurt someone, tell the truth, make it right, and show respect before the court has to teach you what respect costs. So now I want to ask you something. If you had been sitting where I was sitting, would you have handled David Langford the same way, or would you have gone even harder? I'd really like to hear what you think, so leave me a comment and tell me where you stood the moment those texts came out. And if this story meant something to you, if you believe nobody should be above the law and nobody should be too small to be heard, I'd appreciate it if you liked this video and subscribed. I've got another courtroom story waiting for you after this one, and I can promise you it reveals just as much about truth, pride, and human character. I'll see you there, because respect can be faked for a while, but justice has a way of meeting the real person in the end.